app for a Monopoly board game might look like. Um, and what I wanted to do is actually just create a couple screenshots of how like a version of Monopoly Sports would look like, right? And so this is actually sized to what an iPad window would be, right? So if I get my page tool here, and you can see my tools, I have them in a different area a little bit, kind of moving these around. But if I take this page tool and just click on this window in InDesign, this is showing me at 1024 by 768. And then so I have another screenshot too. So in concept, this would essentially, let me go ahead and hold on 1 second here. So in concept, this would essentially be where you could, instead of having dollar bills and so on and so forth, you could actually use your mobile device to play the game, and it could track all of the money and everything else on your device. So make it easier to play, less things to keep track of, and no one would really have to be the banker in the game if you know how Monopoly sort of works. You could just have the machine do it. So it could, this is kind of a concept, that I came up with for a demo. So if a user would use this object on this side and kind of swipe their fingers, is my concept, over to the left, they could kind of see what properties they have really easily, how much money they have, so this device would keep track of all that content as they're playing, like let's say the board game. And then let's just say if someone were to click on chance, they would get like a screen to come up and give them a story. So like this concept would be like a sportscaster would tell them, let's just say, what their chance card would have said if it was on an actual card. It would just be in a more interactive type video format. And then so what would that look like on a phone device? So what I did here was just resized this to be on a phone orientation. So if a user had a phone and we're running the same app, that could be that as well. And then for this video screen as well, the same idea. So to do something like that, what someone in the end would do would just probably export this packaged InDesign file, give it to a developer, and then the developer would go in and cut the pieces that they would need to reproduce the piece together in real life. But so what I'm going to do is actually just use my page tool here and then click on this page and kind of show you how you would sort of just resize something like this. So I'm going to take this object and then figure this is 750 pixels by 1334. So I'm going to use my page tool here and then do 730 by 1334. But what I'm going to need to do is take this liquid page rule and go to scale. So that means that it's going to scale all the content to fit into this box automatically. Let me just double check 750. So I'll change that to 1334. So it gets most of the work done, but it's not perfect. It's just going to basically size everything down exactly to that bottom region. So it's still going to force me to like kind of reinterpret some of this stuff, what this thing is going to look like. So I'm going to copy and cut that, and then move my background up. This will eventually look like something like this. So I'm going to retrain my reference point to make this background sort of fill the space. I'll move this guy sort of center, bottom center, scale it. To just kind of give a sense of like what this thing is going to actually look like in life. These buttons here. So I'm recreating this screen essentially over here. So it's really all I'm going to have is all of this content. This is actually swiped all the way, right? So I have to just recreate that. This is kind of what it looks like swiped all the way. All these other buttons are going to kind of float to the top in the background. Let's see, and then I can just kind of stretch this out, bring these back. And move these a couple steps back. So you're kind of just coming up with like a mock-up, if you will. Centers a little bit more. And then on this screen size, this content is going to get pretty large when someone swipes this over. This is kind of helpful too, like these symbols here in the design are actually like part of the block of copy. So you can kind of lift these up or drop them down using your text tools. But essentially this was actually just drawn out and dropped in. So let me just grab my selection tool. It was literally copy cut, and then it was just, I used some text, I moved it into the spaces and just pasted the object directly in. So now I can move this around without having to select it separately. It's all part of that block of copy. And then you can just scale it up as well. So let me just scale this text to what I think it's gonna, here's my anchor point. So that's kind of what it'll look like. Something like that. Nope. Let's say, yeah, I have more space down here. I'm not sure what I would want to do with that either. So maybe that would take some conceptualizing. Like maybe that's an area for like instant messaging or something. Like if we were on Teams, if I was on Teams with somebody, like someone on my team, I could like text message or something to that effect potentially. Or maybe these are. I'm not sure. Like how would you envision something being useful on your cell phone device to make use of that space? It's just kind of something to sort of play around with and conceptualize and keep in mind. But once you kind of come up with your whole process of what you want your application to look like, that's when I would take Photoshop and sort of sell the idea using it. So I'll drag this image of Photoshop. Now this is basically a stock image that I purchased of an iPad or an iPhone, but you could pretty much very easily just take your own photograph of your own device that you have. But what you could do, and I'm going to sort of minimize this, is I'm going to go into InDesign and I'm going to export just these individual pages that I want to kind of mock up here. So I want to show a screenshot of the iPad version, but then also the mobile version that accompanies that. So for page one, I'll export. In InDesign, I'll just go to the desktop, and then I'll choose PNG file, and then I'll go iPad and screen one. Save. And I can select a range of which page I want to export. I'll select the first page and then hit export. Yeah, it's going to think a little bit. Okay, and then I'll go to this page here, which is the identical version, but just in a different format for the phone. So I'll export that, desktop, and then phone. I got these measurements just on a Google search for figuring out, you know, what a typical iPhone screen is compared to an iPad screen. So it's just a quick search there. Export. All right. So while that's working, what I'm going to do is find them, drag them into Photoshop. And there's one more. Here it is. Okay. Recenter this guy. Okay. So for this piece, let's see where I'm at here on image size. It's saying 10 inches by 18. And my image size here. Okay, so it's going to be really large in comparison. But what I want to do is for the phone image, I I want to actually crop this piece down. So what I'm going to do is actually take my wand tool here and just select this white screen piece. And then I'm going to go over to paths because I want to save this path. So I don't want to like have to select this every time I drag something in and then resize it and skew it. So I'm going to, under paths, I'm going to go make work path. And then I'm just going to hit OK because it's the lowest tolerance I can have. And then this work path is going to save here if I double click it. And it's going to say save path, and I can name it iPhone. And then hit OK. So then at this point I can just select this. If I want my work path to be a selection, I could just select the iPhone path, and then I can go make selection. And then it'll just make that as a selection. So it's just an easy way to like save an area that you will want to select multiple times without having to actually do it. So it works with any kind of pen tool or whatever shape or anything you have. You can just save your work path and then just remake that selection later. So I'm going to do the same for the iPad screen. So I'll make a work path here. Hit OK. There's my work path. I'll double click and then say iPad and hit OK. All right. So then I'll just click off of it, and then it'll just deselect the path. So at this point, I'm going to drag. Let me see how. So at this point, I'm just going to drag this whole thing over. And then I'm going to Command T and make it smaller, just to kind of get close to the size that I'm looking for approximately. Then I'm going to just kind of make it a little bit transparent so I can see the background, what's going on here. Just temporarily, but what I'm going to do is go to Edit, Transform, and then select Distort. And then so as I come in here, I'm just going to kind of match up approximately these corners around this white area here. Just approximately to kind of do that. So it kind of puts a little bit more into context what you're thinking as a designer that you would sell, for a client. So I'll just hit Enter to remove my transform anchor points, and then I'll make my opacity back to 100%. And then remember, I went up over to my paths then, and I'll select iPhone. See that my blue outline is kind of for my path is selected, and I'll go Make Selection. And then so it's just going to kind of sort of round these edges a little bit, just exactly to how the phone screen is shaped. And then I'll just go to Select and then Inverse, or Command-Shift-I is the shortcut, and then I'll just delete that extra content around the edge. And then I'll just bring over the iPad screenshot, place that in there. It's really huge. Scale it down. Just bring it kind of approximately. It doesn't have to be perfect because once we use the distort tool, it's going to make it more believable in that perspective. So then I'll go to Edit, Transform, and Distort again. And then I'll basically zoom into these corners and drag it in. To get it close. And then so for this part, you can see that this phone kind of overlaps, right, that other piece. So I'm going to actually use the line there and then the line up here to kind of estimate approximately what that angle is going to look like behind the phone. So I'm kind of just using that negative space to kind of give a better estimation of what that angle is going to look like. It's not perfect, but So then I'll go over to paths, and then I'll hit iPad, and then I'll go make selection again, and then select inverse, and then just delete that overlap of the screen here, E for deselect, and then bring this up to 100%. So if you wanted to show somebody like what this screen would look like in more of like a nicer way, then you could just take pictures of your devices or your laptops or whatever, and then just use the distort tool and overlay them like that. So then you could one by one show, okay, this is that home screen. The next screen is where someone would swipe, and then so on and so forth. And you can show the two orientations that way. It helps people. It helps to kind of visualize it for people that can't really have kind of a hard time maybe visualizing what you mean by what you're showing in the flat art. All right.